All right, let's jump right in. We're not going to start with a big history lesson today. Instead, we're kicking off with something you just don't hear every day, a truly shocking admission made on the floor of Pakistan's own parliament. Here it is. This is the quote that just sent shockwaves everywhere. I mean, for a nation's own defense minister to stand up and say his forces are, in his own words, physically handicapped, wow. That is an absolutely extraordinary admission of weakness, and it signals a crisis that goes way deeper than any single battle. So the big question is, what in the world is going on in Balochistan that would force a top official to make such a candid and, let's be honest, pretty desperate confession? Well, that's what we're going to unpack. To get that answer, we've got to rewind the clock just a few days before he said that. We need to look at a massive, coordinated assault that seriously rattled the Pakistani military establishment. So, on the night of January 31st, the Balochistan Liberation Army, or the BLA, launched what they called Operation Black Storm. And listen, this wasn't just another small-scale ambush. No. As you can see here, we're talking about a highly sophisticated attack happening in 14 different cities. All at the same time, they hit military bases, intelligence facilities. It showed a level of planning that really caught Pakistani forces completely off guard. And this is where things get really fascinating. Right after the fighting, an information war just exploded. The Pakistani military came out saying, okay, we lost 50 people, but we eliminated 145 of their fighters. But then the BLA comes out with a totally different story. They claim to have killed over 125 Pakistani personnel. I mean, look at these numbers. They're not just a little different, they're on completely different planets. But this kind of an explosion of violence, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? To really get why this is happening, you've got to understand this deep, kind of bitter paradox that's at the very heart of Balochistan itself. First, let's just talk about sheer size. To get a handle on this conflict, you have to appreciate the scale we're dealing with. We're talking about a region that makes up a staggering 40% of Pakistan's entire landmass. It is huge. It's rugged, it borders Iran and Afghanistan, and it's incredibly difficult to control. And here's why this massive piece of land is so critical. Just look at this breakdown. It's basically a treasure chest for Pakistan. A third of the country's natural gas, tons of coal, oil, gold, you name it, even rare earth minerals. This province is supposed to be the resource engine of the country, which makes what we're about to see next all the more tragic. And here it is. This is the flip side of that coin. The brutal reality. Even though they're sitting on top of all this incredible wealth, the people living in Balochistan face some of the absolute worst conditions in the entire country. A poverty rate of 96%. Just let that sink in. Education, only about a quarter of the people. And it has the highest infant mortality rate in Pakistan. That gap right there, between the wealth in the ground and the poverty on the surface, that's the fuel for this whole conflict. But this isn't just a local problem for Pakistan. Oh no. Because of where it is and what it has, Balochistan has turned into a giant chessboard for global superpowers. And right in the middle of that chessboard is this thing called CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It's this massive, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project, and its crown jewel is the Gwadar port, right there on the Balochistan coast. For China, this isn't just a port. It's their strategic gateway to the Arabian Sea. So what you end up with is this incredibly complicated web of international interests. You've got China, who's all in, needing stability to protect its massive CPEC investment. Meanwhile, the United States is keeping a close eye on the region's rare earth minerals, which is why they've officially labeled the BLA as a terrorist group. And it's not just the big guys. Even countries like Canada have money tied up in the mines there. It feels like everyone wants a piece of the pie, and that just throws gasoline on the fire. So you can imagine, after a huge attack like Operation Black Storm, the reaction was fast and furious. And it involved not just these big global players, but also a familiar round of finger-pointing from Islamabad. The fallout was almost instant. China got really nervous, started pulling its citizens out, and demanded better security for its projects. You had the usual condemnations from Western embassies and the OIC, and then, almost like clockwork, Pakistan's internal minister points the finger directly at their regional rival, India. India, of course, just bats it away, basically saying, hey, maybe you should get your own house in order. And so this brings us full circle, right back to where we began, to that defense minister's incredible admission in parliament. It really shines a light on the huge military problem that Pakistan is facing.
When you really break it down, what the army is up against is a classic, almost textbook counterinsurgency nightmare. The place is just too big to patrol effectively. The rebels can melt away into the rugged landscape or the local population. And, as the government itself is now admitting, they just flat out don't have the money or the manpower to win this fight. So you see, they're not just fighting a bunch of rebels with guns. They're fighting against geography itself. And maybe even more powerfully, they're fighting against decades of deep-seated anger from a population that feels like its home has been plundered, while they've been left behind with nothing.
And that leaves us with this one final, really provocative question. When a country's own defense minister gets up and publicly calls his military handicapped, is he just stating a painful truth, or is he actually signaling to the world, and maybe even to his own people, that this long, bloody war in their most vital province is, for all intents and purposes, simply unwinnable?